Enforcement of standards of discipline on the job for work performance rests largely in the hands of the union alone. If we had a problem with one of our own, we just never sent them out to work. You still see that. I know and you know that in the building trades and some unions, if you were sending out people, if somebody who was a member who really, really didn't represent what the union stood for, they aren't going to work until they decide to do it. Union hiring halls. We had a union hiring hall. I had to come and see Yvonne. Let's flip a page. Strike strategy. Well, my box tells me monopoly of skill, the economic weapon of winning. Scarcity. Just go home, wait a while to win a strike. The only substitute for a skilled carpenter is another carpenter. Without it, there's nothing I can do. Looking at that strike strategy that's in front of you, let's bring that forward to today's world, because remember I said all of these economies all exist and those types of unions all exist to this very day. Let's talk about a modern example, the baseball strike. Well, the baseball strike, the first couple times that it happened, I mean, we who love the Tigers, they never win, but we who love the Tigers, and I know the Boston Red Sox and all the teams out in Los Angeles, everybody gets a little bit excited, but after a while, things negate it, and we can live with it for a while, okay? You throw in steroids and things like that, pretty soon we can start to really live without it, because those weren't really people, real people. The hockey strike was very successful, and what they did is the National Hockey League players formed a league when they went on strike against the owners, and they went on a world tour. And they were led by the union leadership that happened to be with our Detroit Red Wings, and they went on a world tour. And by the time they got back from the world tour, the owners came to a conclusion that maybe they wanted to negotiate with the National Hockey League Players Association, and it was over. We've never had a strike since. Now, on the negative side, the baseball umpires had a strike, and they all got replaced permanently. What they didn't realize is they had a whole bunch of umpires in training. They just brought them up. And I guess if you don't care about the quality of what happened until they got in place, it happened. So even though you have a craft, I always look at, did you assure the scarcity? They didn't. There's no real replacement for a great hockey player. There is a replacement for an umpire. Now, what we have to look at is the poor of the economy, the high unemployment, and those effects have now negated, in a modern context, the craft's ability to use scarcity, except for very, very specific moments. As an example, we both do a lot of facilitating for defense installations, and one of them was at the Oak Ridge National Lab, and that's where they assemble the H-bomb, the A-bomb, and they do have a, what's the other, N-bomb? They do, or whatever the hell that is, the one that radiates everybody, leaves all the buildings there, but the people are gone. They do have one of those things, I found. So I went down, they had a jurisdictional dispute, and the jurisdictional dispute was between the IBEW representative and the plumber and pipe fitter representative. And these are people that assembled, they took the H-bombs that were basically old, they took them apart, took out the plutonium, put in new plutonium, reconnected it, and went on. And so I went through this ungodly security to get there, and I'm in this meeting with everybody, all the crafts, 19 crafts, and I said, well, what's the jurisdiction? Well, I didn't realize it, but I do now, that the H-bomb trigger mechanism is an A-bomb. And inside the trigger mechanism, there's a tiny little tube, a pipe made out of plastic. And it has some form of gas in it that helps the ignition from the A-bomb to set the H-bomb on. And the issue was, is this an electrician's work or a pipe fitter's work? So I thought, I better take this very seriously. And if I'm going to be able to talk to highly intelligent, highly skilled, trained to the nth degree people to look at this from a third perspective, like you did, Bill, with some of the things, I've got to keep my objectivity and understand how they got there. They got there from a history that was 200 years ago. And why? Because it was important to protect the scarcity of my skill. Now, times say that you have to modify those things. Well, long and short is we finally did reach an agreement on it, and it worked out quite well. But I often thought about that. I don't care what you're making. If you're making weapons of war, for God's sake, there's always going to be somebody performing the work, somebody who has been trained in two different things, and they're both are going to look at that same thing and say, I believe that's where I should be. That is words that are 200 years old, and don't disrespect them. Appreciate them, work with them, and you'll get through it. And that's the things, Bill, I was thinking about, you were talking about, that came up through the floor. They're always there. And as long as you can keep that perspective, you'll be okay. There are three styles of leadership. In the craft economy, it was skill manual. Why was Yvonne selected as the president, if you will? Because she was the oldest member of the male lineage, and you were the most gifted. You were a journeyman carpenter. That was it. That is what it's all about. But I want you to go to the information box. The unions at that time were non-political. Why? Because you didn't need laws to enforce your rights, because they were enforced through the scarcity of my hands and my knowledge. Management was non-dominant. Why? Because they were just owners in name. That the real determination of quality, quantity, design, materials would lie with the crafts person. To sum up this section, if you go over a page, you're going to see a little chart that looks like this. You will see this chart throughout all of the 3 days. And what it tries to do is trace through now what we have talked about in all of these economies for a comparison to see where the changes came. How work is organized? Well, obviously along craft lines. How am I paid for my work? A wage level. And we use that within our organization to take care of our own. Those later manifested themselves into funds for training, funds for health care, for pensions and whatever. Some of them were run by unions, some were jointly run. How organizations are structured? Flat. Unions were very flat. They were local. Management was flat. Local. Somebody owned the damn place. Was there any labor and employment laws? No, there were none. Why? I didn't need any. There's no need. I had scarcity of my hands. Was there any social legislation? No, we took care of our own. At the time. A lot has changed. Why we discriminate? Yes, we discriminated along and for the crafts, and without further documentation and all of the rest. Obviously, we discriminated within the crafts because it was passed down from the male to the male to the male to the male to the male, which came from Western Europe, which was tended to be white, 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 white. And the change started, what, in the 60s and the 70s? And it was a struggle. Why are we violent? We weren't. We didn't have to be violent because we weren't confronted. You either took us or you didn't. Why we can't trust? Well, trust was not a matter at this point. Why? Because it didn't matter. Because we had the scarcity of the skill. If you wanted something done, it was us. Now, just for a brief moment, I'd like you to turn over a page. And this is where we're going to stop, and I'm going to turn back to Maureen. You see my old chart again. And you see something called the crossover period. And this is where we're going to take up in the morning. But the thing that I want you to notice is the second bullet point. Why did this all change? The Industrial Revolution caused the rise of the factory system. And with a factory, I had owners, I had managers, and they put the skill of my hands into a machine. God help us. But it built a huge America. But there were losses. Just to give you a little thought is I'd like you at some point when you get home to go to a website called MakerBot, MakerBot.com. ERBot.com, all one word. A number of years ago, I read about a printer that could print a part. I'm going, that's impossible. A printer prints on flat paper, one dimension. So I waited and I waited and I waited. I read weird magazines. It's called Wired magazine. I always love it because they always raise up all this stuff there. And lo and behold, there is such a printer now. 5 years ago, it cost $100,000. Today, it's made in Michigan, by the way, and right here in Detroit. And today it's $500. And it prints parts. Now, I want to visualize a machine that is generally about that size. It has a material feed, so it could be molten metal, it could be plastic, it could be whatever you're using. And it feeds it into a printer, and what it does is you do computer-aided design, you design the part, you put the CD in the machine, the feed starts, and it goes zip, 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 zip. Pretty soon it's all done, yeah. You've seen it. And I thought, I told Maureen, I said, well, I told these guys, I said, well, I'll put 35 of those in my garage and I can make parts all up. Hell, I don't need anything. And then I thought, what happened to the union? What happened to management? What happened to everybody?
What happened to the stone wall?
Yeah, except that you've got to remember, you are the educator of first choice and of last. We have a history of owning those things as unions. We have a history of running those things as union successfully in our past. So nothing is unthinkable for us.